So we're on the final part of the tutorial, HTTP service. We went through hero detail, master detail, multiple components, services, routing, and now we're on the last one, getting and saving data. Okay, so we convert our service and components to use Angular's HTTP service. Our stakeholders appreciate our progress. Now they want to get the hero data from a server, let users add, edit, and delete heroes, and save these changes back to the server. In this chapter, we teach our application to make the corresponding HTTP calls to our remote server's web API. Okay, run the live example for this part. Let's take a look. So I'm assuming this is the same other than the data is coming from a remote server. Oh, this is new. Okay. And there's a search button. Okay. Where we left off. In the previous chapter, we learned to navigate between the dashboard and the fixed heroes list, editing a selected hero along the way. That's our starting point for this chapter. Keep the app transpiling and running. Open the terminal. Okay, so we already have our npm running. Let's just double check that's still working. So there it is. Still transpiling on the fly, still watching the folders. Providing HTTP services. The HTTP module is not a core Angular module. It's Angular optional approach to web access, and it exists. Oh, it's Angular's optional approach to web access, and it exists as a separate add-on module called Angular/HTTP, shipped in a separate script file as part of the Angular npm package. Fortunately, we are ready to import from @AngularHTTP because systemjs.config configured systemjs to load that library when we need it. Okay. Register for HTTP services. Our app will depend upon the Angular HTTP service, which itself depends upon other supporting services. The HTTP module from @Angular HTTP library holds providers for a complete set of HTTP services. We should be able to access these services from anywhere in the application. So we register them all by adding HTTP module to the imports list of the app module, where we bootstrap the application and its root app component. So let's open up app module. So what are we doing? We register them all by adding HTTP module to the imports. So there they've added it under my forms. So let's do that. Import HTTP module from @Angular HTTP. Then they have the routing. Ours is further down. App component, hero component, everything else is the same. Hero service, yep, it's just in a different order, but that's okay. Then we have to add HTTP module to the imports. So that's here. I don't know if that matters, if the order matters. So far it hasn't been a problem, so let's put it at the end. Don't forget the comma. Nothing in the declarations. Nothing else further down. Okay. Notice that we supply HTTP module as part of the imports array in the root ng module app module. Simulating the web API. We recommend registering application-wide services in the root app module providers. Okay. Our application is in the early stages of development and far from ready for production. We don't even have a web server that can handle requests for heroes. Until we do, we'll have to fake it. We're going to trick the HTTP client into fetching and saving data from a mock service, the InMemory Web API. here's a version of our app module that performs this trick. So so far this is all the same. Then these two are new. They're adding InMemory Web API Module, InMemory Data Service. Okay, so these are new. We're going to do that. And then they added to the imports down here. All right, let's do that. Now the only reason we're doing this is because we don't have the backend data ready yet. So we'll fake it. InMemory Data Service from InMemory. So this one we have to create. And then down in the imports, we add InMemory Web API Module, InMemory Data Service. Okay. Now this is complaining because we haven't created this file. Rather than require a real API, this example simulates communication with a remote server by adding the InMemory Web API module to the module imports, effectively replacing the HTTP client's XHR backend service with an in-memory alternative. Okay, and that's this line here. We added that to the imports. Okay, we did that. The for root here, method takes an in-memory data service class that primes the in-memory database as follows. Okay, so this file that we haven't created yet will contain the Angular in-memory API, and we're going to export this class, which implements this class we've imported. We'll create a database, and we will create an array of heroes. Here's the data, and we return that array. Now, why does it return in these curly brackets? I don't know. I'm not sure what that, I don't know if that's a TypeScript thing or an Angular thing. Why is it inside of this? I don't know yet. We'll figure it out later. So, does it want me to create this? All right, let's make it. New file. In memory data.service.ts. So we import InMemory DB Service. Oh, it's capital S. From Angular InMemory Web API. And then we export the class. Implementing that service we just imported. Not data service, it's a DB service. We create a database using this function. Oh, okay. And inside this function, oh, we're just creating this function. Okay, so then in here, in this function, we create heroes. We create an array. Now I'm not going to type this all out. Let's just copy this. All right, ID and a name. And finally, we return it. Again, I'm not sure, like what if I remove this? If I did this, it doesn't complain. I'll have to look that up. So this file replaces the mock heroes file, which is now safe to delete. So let's open up mock heroes. Here we were originally exporting this data. So this was real-time synchronous data. Now we're going to do a service that simulates an asynchronous call. So we can delete this file. Okay, does it want me to delete this? Last chance. Yep, okay. Yes, delete it. This chapter is an introduction to the Angular HTTP library. Please don't be distracted by the details of this backend substitution. Just follow along with the example. Look at our current hero service implementation. Okay, so we got to go to our hero service here. And what we originally had, a get heroes function, which returned a promise, of heroes. Okay, we're in the right place. We returned the promise resolved with mock heroes. It may have seemed like overkill at the time, but we were anticipating the day when we fetch heroes with an HTTP client, and we knew that that would have to be an asynchronous operation. That day has arrived. Let's convert get heroes to use HTTP service. So in this service file, we are going to define a path, it looks like, a URL path. So that's, where does that go? So I guess since we deleted this file originally, I'm going to comment that out for now. Heroes URL equals API heroes. Now it doesn't like this here, so this probably has to be inside the class here. Okay, and actually maybe at the beginning before we use it in the functions. Okay. Now because we didn't import this class of heroes, and it's going to be coming from an API call, we need a constructor first. So I guess that's here. Well, it's putting it below, so let's put it below. We'll create the constructor. So we're creating a private variable. We're feeding it in here of type HTTP. Oh, I don't need to leave it there. Okay. Now it doesn't know what this is yet. We didn't import it, and I don't see it here. I'm not sure why. Okay. And then we have the getHeroes function, which is still a promise, which is still an array of heroes. And we're still returning that promise. Oh, we're not returning the promise. This is different. So what we're doing instead, we are returning this.http get this.heroes URL, and then that is a promise. Oh, we're converting this observable result into a promise, and then with that response, we feed that into an arrow function. Okay. The JSON data of the response which is a type hero array. So it's bothering me that we didn't define this HTTP class. We didn't import this yet. I don't know if we're missing a step. I might have to go back, or if it's going to be further down. Oh, it's our next step. I'm not sure why they did that second, but okay. So then we also have to add a catch in case something goes wrong. There. And if something does go wrong, we call this handle error function, which we haven't written yet. We will write that right now. But not in here, not in this function. We'll do it outside, and this is a private function. Now this is some TypeScript typing going on here. We're saying we're making a handle error function, which is feeding in an error of type any. So it could be a number, it could be a string, it could be a Boolean. And this function itself will return a promise of any type. We're going to do a little console log to report an error. An error occurred with the error message. Okay. And of course, we have to return the promise. Or we reject the promise. Because we promised to return something, something went wrong, we have to return something, so we have to reject that promise. So it alerts, I think. Now this single hero function, that again, this should still work once, because this relies on the data we get from the heroes. So this should still work, I think. We'll see. And now we have to update our import. I'm not sure why they did the second, but okay. So we have to import headers. That's new. HTTP from @Angular HTTP. Now this function we used to promise, that's not built in. We need to use that from the RxJS library, so we import that. We originally used another RxJS function. It was the switch map function. So this will be a second function we use to promise. I know you can import the whole RxJS library, but I know from past experience when you do that, this ends up being quite large. It ends up being like 600K or more. So if you just import the little bit of code you want specifically, then you really cut back on the file size. All right, we import the hero from this hero file. That's a class that defines the class type. Okay. I have a typo, which is easily spotted. Okay, good. Refresh the browser. The hero data should be successfully loaded from the mock server. Cross our fingers. Yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, we have data. This data is now coming from where is it coming from? from here. So this service, how does it know to go in here? Where was this defined? In our heroes, in our app module, was it? So it's coming in from here. Right, we had this service, we imported it, we put it into the import here. This for root, I think we used what we learned earlier. This was for a path in our route. So if we go back to our hero service, this path, I don't quite understand this. Let's go back to the tutorial. So it must be here. When we get the heroes, we use a service call to get heroes. And then okay, so this one is tied together to this InMemory data service here. We have a typo here, or something's wrong here. What's going on here? This is a hero service. The error here is property hero does not exist on type hero detail component. I won't lie, I'm a little bit stumped. I'm a little bit lost with this error. So when we subscribe to this route, we have this path with the parameter. We get a hero. So we use the service to get a hero. We pass in an ID and we subscribe to it so we can get the result back. And when we do, we are basically saving the result of this hero into this.hero, but it's saying this.hero doesn't exist. So we didn't define that anywhere. So maybe we're supposed to and we missed it. Thinking of doing is putting here this dot hero equals is of type hero. So why don't we just do hero is of a type hero. Then it stops complaining and our app still works. Still works and it stopped complaining. So we just had to define this hero. We created a variable called hero of type heroes class, which is imported here. Just so when we use it and store data into it, and the template in here will use that variable, it's all happy. I guess the fact that I didn't have this here, it still kind of let me use it, but it was just bad practice, so it underlined it. That is my guess. So let's continue. We're still returning a promise, but we're creating it differently. The Angular HTTP GET returns an RxJS observable. Observables are a powerful way to manage asynchronous data flows. We'll learn about observables later in this chapter. For now, we get back on familiar ground by immediately converting that observable to a promise to use the promise operator. We talked about this earlier. Unfortunately, the Angular observable doesn't have a toPromise operator, not out of the box. The Angular observable is a bare bones implementation. There are scores of operators like toPromise that extends observable with useful capabilities. If we want those capabilities, we have to add the operators ourselves. And that's what we did here, and that's when I mentioned you could import the whole library, but if you only want that one operator, you'll save a lot of file size in your project. Extracting the data in the then callback. Okay, so that would be back in the heroes service here. We are talking about this. So let's see what it says. Let's move this over so we can see them both side by side. So here, in the promises then, here, callback, we call the JSON method of the HTTP response to extract the data within the response. So we call the JSON method, this one here, this response JSON method of the HTTP response here to extract the data within the response. That response JSON has a single data property. The data property holds the array of heroes that the caller really wants. So we grab the array and return it as a resolved promise value. Pay close attention to the shape of the data returned by the server. This particular InMemory Web API example happens to return an object with a data property. Your API might return something else. Adjust the code to match your web API. The caller is unaware of these machinations. It receives a promise of heroes just as it did before. It has no idea that we fetched the heroes from the mock server. It knows nothing of the twists and turns required to convert the HTTP response into a heroes. Such is the beauty and the purpose of delegating data access to a service like this hero service. Error handling. At the end of the getHeroes function, we call server failures and pass them to an error handler. This is a critical step. We must anticipate HTTP failures as they happen frequently for reasons beyond our control. So here's the function we added, handle error, and we display the message, and we reject the promise. In this demo service, we log the error to the console. We would do better in real life. We also decided to return a user-friendly form of the error to the caller in the rejected promise so that the caller can display a proper error message to the user. Get hero by ID. So the hero detail component asks the hero service to fetch a single hero to edit. The hero service currently fetches all heroes and then finds the desired hero by filtering for one of the matching ID. That's fine in a simulation. It's wasteful to ask a real server for all heroes when we only want one. Most web APIs support a get by ID request in the form of this is the path you would use, API/hero, and then the ID parameter. So the example here is API/hero/11. So update the hero service get hero method. So this method down here, instead of filtering out the data which has all the heroes, we're only going to ask for specifically that one hero from the server. Okay. So what do we change? Let's get rid of this response, or this return for now. We create a constant URL. Now what's this? We have a $, this heroes URL, $, squiggly bracket ID, semicolon. So we have a URL. It looks like, I don't know, like a template or something. I'm not sure. A pattern or something. Then we return this .http get, which is a promise. So we say, oh, sorry, which is an observable. So we convert it to a promise. Then with that response, we put that into an arrow function. Response, we use a response.json function. That was lowercase. As hero. Not clear on what this means yet. And then we catch the error. Okay, so we don't need this anymore. I'm just going to delete it. It's almost the same as get heroes. The URL identifies which hero the server should update by encoding the hero ID into the URL to match the API hero ID pattern. So this is the pattern here. So we're basically feeding in this value. This is strange. I still don't quite get this. I guess this is a specific pattern that this HTTP method is expecting us to construct. So we'll just go with it for now. Although we made significant internal changes to the getHeroes and the getHero function, the public signature did not change. We still return a promise from both methods. We won't have to update any of the components that call them. Our stakeholders are thrilled with the Web API integration so far. Now they want the ability to create and delete heroes. Let's see first what happens when we try to update a hero's details. We can edit a hero's name already in the hero detail view. Go ahead and try it. So yeah, that's clicking here. We go into the details view. Let's just save everything because this app might not be refreshed. So let's reload. Go to the heroes, click on one of these, go to the details view, and something's broken. Let's just double check the error console. There is an error in the hero service. So maybe something here that we are missing. Something related to this, since this is what we just wrote. This function here looks okay. Let's go back to the tutorial and see what I could have mistyped. Get hero function, okay. ID number. Returns a promise of type hero. So far so good. Constant URL. And we return this. Now the pattern might not match. Let's see. This heroes URL. There is a missing slash here. So I guess the pattern is not matching. The service is failing. Let's take a look and see if that was a problem. Still something wrong here. Let's see. We are getting a error in the service still, not found. So it is still something to do with this URL, this hero's URL. Let's take a closer look. So $, this hero's URL. Then we have a slash $, ID. So far this looks fine to me. I don't know if this backtick instead of a single quote matters. Let's try that. It could very well be just that backtick is a problem. And that's exactly what it was. So I just assumed that they would be interchangeable, but it looks like they're not. So this little backtick is actually part of the pattern that it was expecting. So that's important. I was just treating this as a string, but this is actually part of the string, it seems like. Okay, so what's left? Where were we? So we know that it's working. I could change this and the route would take us to the next detail. Number 13, working fine. Update hero details. We can edit a hero's name already in the hero detail view. Go ahead and try it. As we type, the hero name is updated in the view heading. Okay, so let's try that. Yep, they are updated in the view heading. But when we hit the back button, the changes are lost. So back button, this no longer has HHH at the end. Updates weren't lost before. What changed? When the app used a list of mock heroes, the updates were applied directly to the hero objects within the single app-wide shared list. Now that we are fetching data from a server, if we want changes to persist, we'll need to write them back to the server. Right, okay, so let's ensure that edits to a hero's name aren't lost. Start by adding to the end of the hero detail template a save button with a click event binding that invokes a new component method named save. So in the hero detail component, we will create a button. Oh, not in the component, in the HTML, because we separated this out to its own HTML file. Okay, so this guy, we will add a button. With a click function as well. That will save. And of course we need the word, not search, save. Okay. The save method persists hero name changes using this hero service update method and then navigates back to the previous view. So back to the component. We need to add that new function, I would assume. Yep, save. It does not return back data, so we just say void. This hero service update, this.hero, then arrow function, this go back and close bracket semicolon. So what's happening here? So when we run this function, this hero service update function, which we didn't write yet, will feed in the current hero that we're editing. And with the response, we have an arrow function that calls this. So it goes back one page. So this is basically like going back button, but also saving before we do that. So now we have to create an update function, update method, I should say. It's a method. You call it a method when it's part of a class, but it's basically a function.